built post-World War II suburbs. This was when the so-called convenience foods were born, like the legendary foil-wrapped TV dinner, not to mention a host of other tasty processed delicacies devised to make our lives easier and better. By now, Colin Campbell was in graduate school at Cornell University, which had one of the most prestigious nutritional science departments in the country. His research was on animal nutrition and biochemistry.
But it was focused more on feeding animals for their ability to be able to produce meat, milk, and eggs, protein containing. And so my own research was focused on protein, making sure we got enough. It was considered to be the vital nutrient. It was one of the first nutrients discovered. And without protein, the animal would die. So it was a life force. And in fact, in even the early 1900s, there were statements made that this is the stuff of civilization itself.
Protein was also nearly synonymous with animal-based foods like meat. It still is today, all over America.
Why do you think meat is important in our diet?
Protein.
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 A lot of protein.
We need protein, don't we? We can't live without protein.
The idea that plants had protein also didn't come into play until maybe the late 1800s, early 1900s, and then it struggled through the years.
No matter what source the protein came from, in the late 1950s, most scientists believed the world needed a lot more of it.
We had a lot of starving and malnourished children in the world. And so in my community, in the nutrition community, there were discussions about why so, what could be done. And one of the prominent thoughts was to make sure they get enough protein. I certainly went along with this view.
At about the same time, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn was just beginning his medical career at the world-famous Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland, Ohio. Surgery soon became his specialty.
There's something awfully satisfying about if you can remove the disease. For instance, if a patient had gallstones, you could remove them. If it was a gastric ulcer or a stomach ulcer, you'd directly take care of that. If it's a hernia, the same thing.
During the 1960s, heart disease was on the rise in the U.S.
What doctors commonly call coronary artery disease is usually caused by a condition of the arteries that supply the heart with blood.
What happens is that over time, a fatty substance in the bloodstream called cholesterol builds up in the coronary arteries, restricting the blood flow to the heart. This can ultimately cause several problems, from severe chest pain called angina to heart attacks. Cholesterol is a natural substance produced by all animals, including humans, and it's an essential component of our cells' walls. But when we consume dietary cholesterol, which is only found in animal foods like meat, eggs, and dairy products, it tends to stay in the bloodstream. This so-called plaque is what collects on the inside of our blood vessels and is the major cause of coronary artery disease.
In the late 1960s, a colleague of Dr. Esselstyn's at the Cleveland Clinic made a major breakthrough in the treatment of this condition.
In fact, Esselstyn shared space with him in the clinic's surgical locker room. His name was Dr. Rene Favallaro.
Rene really sparkled in the operating room, and in 1967 he did his first bypass graft at the clinic, coronary artery bypass graft.
This revolutionary new procedure was accomplished by removing a vein from the patient's leg, then stitching it on the heart's blocked coronary artery to allow the blood to flow around or bypass the blockage. Today, over 500,000 Americans go under the knife annually for heart bypass surgery, costing around $100,000 apiece. These operations alone constitute a staggering total of nearly $50 billion. Joey Acoin lives in Tampa, Florida, where he owns and operates a landscaping company.
I tell everybody, the joke with everybody with me is, I don't eat to live, I live to eat. And my whole life, I ate whatever I wanted.
In 2004, doctors discovered Joey had a dangerously high cholesterol level of 320 and a hazardous blood sugar level of 480. This not only made him a type 2 diabetic, but a prime candidate for a heart attack and a stroke.
And this is my daily pill regimen. I got 2 pills I take for my diabetes, then I got one for cholesterol, one for high blood pressure, and then I take Byetta, which is an injectable medicine, every morning before breakfast and every night before dinner. And that's what I've been doing for almost 4 years now. And I know it makes me tired, and I just don't feel normal. I only sleep 4 hours a night or so. I just hate taking them.
In the mid-1960s, Dr. Campbell was in the Philippines, trying to get more protein to millions of malnourished children. To keep costs down, he and his colleagues decided not to use animal-based protein. The program was beginning to show success. But then Dr. Campbell stumbled onto a piece of information that was extremely important. It centered on the more affluent families in the Philippines, who were eating relatively high amounts of animal-based foods.
But at the same time, they were the ones most likely to have the children who were susceptible to getting liver cancer.
This was very unusual, since liver cancers are mainly found in adults.
But just the mere fact that they occurred in children said, you know, there's something here. This is pretty significant.
Shortly afterward, Dr. Campbell came across a scientific paper published in a little-known Indian medical journal. It detailed work that had been done on a population of experimental rats that were first exposed to a carcinogen called aflatoxin, then fed a diet of casein, the main protein found in milk.
They were testing the effect of protein on the development of liver cancer. They used two different levels of protein. They used 20% of total calories, and then they used a much lower level, 5%. 20% turned on cancer, 5% turned it off.
This Indian paper, together with what Dr. Campbell had learned about increased liver cancers in children eating animal-based foods, combined to create a decisive moment in his work and his life.
Because we learned that animal protein was really good in turning on cancer.
During the same time, the way Americans ate was changing, again.
The number of fast food franchises was exploding as more and more overscheduled Americans began using them as a convenient way to feed themselves and their families.
While the fast food revolution was sweeping the nation, the rate of cancer deaths in America was continuing to rise. As a result, in 1971, President Richard Nixon initiated a program that was dubbed the War on Cancer.
We are here today for the purpose of signing the Cancer Act of 1971. And I hope that in the years ahead, that we may look back on this day and this action as being the most significant action taken during this administration.
On the front lines of this new war was Caldwell Esselstyn. By 1978, he was chairman of the breast cancer task force at the Cleveland Clinic. Yet he soon began to doubt the medical procedures he was using.
No matter how many of these operations I was doing for women for breast cancer, I wasn't doing one single thing for the next unsuspecting victim.
So Dr. Esselstyn started investigating the global statistics on breast cancer. One of the facts he discovered was that the incidence of breast cancer in Kenya was far lower than it was in the United States.
In fact, in 1978, the chances of a woman getting breast cancer in Kenya were 82 times lower than in the U.S. Dr.
Esselstyn was even more surprised by the numbers he discovered for some other types of cancer.
In the entire nation of Japan, in 1958, how many autopsy-proven deaths were there from cancer of the prostate? 18. 18 in the entire nation. That, to me, was about the most mind-boggling public health figure that I think I'd ever encountered.
In the same year, the U.S. population was only about twice the size of Japan's, yet the number of prostate cancer deaths exceeded 14,000. Dr. Esselstyn also discovered that in the early 1970s, the risk for heart disease in rural China was 12 times lower than it was in the U.S. And in the highlands of Papua New Guinea, heart disease was rarely encountered. The link he noted between all the areas he studied was simple.
Virtually, the Western diet was non-existent. They had no animal products. They had no dairy, no meat.
Even more compelling to Esselstyn was some historical data that had long been overlooked. In World War II, the Germans occupied Norway. Among the first things they did was confiscate all the livestock and farm animals to provide supplies for their own troops. So the Norwegians were forced to eat mainly plant-based